Pythagoras was born in 570 BCE in Samos, Ionia, which is now western Turkey. Little is known of his childhood, but some reports say he was a gifted athlete and child prodigy. His father was a merchant, so they traveled a lot together to as far away as Italy. He was taught by Thales of Miletus in Greece before traveling for 30 years. He might have been taught geometry while in Egypt and learned more when in Babylon, such as about square roots. He created a school when he returned to Samos, but the people there didn't like the emphasis on Egyptian mystics, so he moved to Italy and opened a school there in Croton, where his followers who studied mathematics called themselves mathematicoi. His school is sometimes called a cult because the around 300 followers were devout and practically worshipped Pythagoras. They had strict rules, such as they weren't allowed to eat beans, they were vegetarian, and the newcomers couldn't speak for the first 5 years. They were required to observe and memorize lessons. However, it was progressive in how women were allowed to attend classes there. As far as his contributions to mathematics, he proved the Pythagorean theorem that the square of two legs of a triangle is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. But it is now believed that the Babylonians thought of this, and Pythagoras was just the first to write it as a proof. He and his followers also proved that the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. An even greater contribution was how he saw numbers. He believed numbers existed everywhere in nature and that the answer to life's questions could be found by studying mathematics. He was the first person to see numbers as their own entities, instead of a way of counting physical objects. This means that to him, 5 was 5, instead of 5 dogs or 5 houses. He discovered irrational numbers, but he didn't believe in irrational numbers because he believed everything could be expressed as whole numbers, or ratios of whole numbers. So he also rejected the idea of infinity. Pythagoras believed math was the answer to everything in nature. His discoveries in the area of music reaffirmed these beliefs. He figured out that 2 strings on a lyre, which is like a modern harp, sounded best together when the ratio of their lengths were whole numbers. He also found that the length of the string determined the pitch. Eventually, hostility towards his followers forced him to evacuate Croton, and he died shortly after. Some believe he committed suicide out of fear that one of his enemies would take over his school. His school thrived for a few more decades until finally coming under attack by other Italians and forcing his followers to disperse. Much mystery surrounds the life and findings of Pythagoras, as it was a long time ago. He didn't write down many of his ideas, and his school was highly secretive. In fact, his followers never took credit for the ideas, so credit could be given to Pythagoras. However, we know enough to believe that he actually came up with some ideas that are still used today, most notably the Pythagorean theorem. However, he was also a pioneer in deductive reasoning, which would be used heavily in mathematics. His theory about music can be applied to chemistry because, like he figured out, every octave is 8 notes apart, and in chemistry, every 8th elements have very similar properties.